OMU Commissioners Meeting, third work session, 3rd of November 2016.
And that's our 5-year forecast, financial forecast. We are required by, under your guidance, policy documents, governance policy, to provide this on an annual basis to you. And as we do planning here, we're looking obviously longer than 5 years, but this is our 5-year official forecast. Recently, you'll see that the electric forecast is consistent with what we have presented to the rating agencies as part of our recent electric bond refunding. And the water forecast is something that you'll see for the first time that does incorporate the likely expansion of the capital. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason Fox, who's going to run through the 2 presentations.
Okay, you all have already seen these PowerPoints, so I will do everything I can to keep through. But if you have questions, feel free to stop me. We'll start with electric and then we'll move to water. Like Terry said, it's a 5-year forecast. I'll actually be displaying on a lot of slides 6 years. So I have our current year budget, our fiscal year 2017 budget, and then 5 years of projection beyond that, 2018 through 22. And a couple of the slides will actually have a couple years of historical actual data for reference. These are forecasts. They should be considered, they should be seen as such. They should be considered kind of a work in progress. As conditions change, the forecast will change. But they're our best estimate based on current conditions as we know. Some things that could change. As you know, the IRP is going to be released in the next few weeks. So when it is, I could change something in here. On the water side, something like the cabin expansion numbers could change, causing a change in the forecast. You will see some things like rate changes that we project. We're obviously not asking for any action on rate changes. We just want to present them, and we'll come back for approval closer to that time if they pan out. So starting with electric. Kind of where we at on rates currently. So our base rates, they are simply currently as they were last approved by you all and by the City Commission. The ECA, the Energy Cost Adjustment, is at 3.07 cents per kilowatt hour as of April of this year. The ECCA is averaging about almost 2 cents per kilowatt hour. And as you recall, it's made up of several components, SO2, NOx, and mercury controls. Looking ahead, what's going to change with those rates? In our current projection, we continue to have ECCA from MABS. MABS is mercury and air toxic regulation that includes mercury control. That began in 2016. They continue. We anticipate an additional adder for ECCA in 2021 for 316B compliance. 316B compliance, I know you've heard of before. That's the fish screens regulation for the power plant. We do propose a base rate increase in 2020 of 9.5% and another 9.5% base rate increase in 2021. So the numbers that you're going to see are based on that base rate increase in those 2 years. That's required to cover incremental debt and increased fixed O&M. There is an ECA increase of 1 cent per kilowatt hour budgeted in 2017, actually to take effect on December 1st of 2016. But as we near that date, we're going to be refining the actual increase needed. But what you see today just has the budget increase of 1 cent. There are two additional changes in the ECA in the projection period. There is a 1 cent increase in 2018 in the numbers that you'll see, and a 1 cent decrease in 2021. And I'll talk a little bit more shortly about the need for each of those. And then finally, on the ECCA, The biggest parts of the ECCA are for SO2 and NOx. A large part of the SO2 and NOx costs are dropping off in 2020. And so the ECCA for those two components is going down, is projected to go down as well. On this slide, start with the O&M, which is actually at the bottom. Routine increases in O&M, 3 to 5%, depending on what the cost is. But the more detailed part of the slide is the capital spending plan. There are two sources of funds that we have projected in this projection period. At the beginning of this fiscal year, there were about $8 million left in construction funds. And we proposed issuing a bond of $19.2 million in 2018, fiscal 2018. So those two sources of funds will pay for the things that we have listed here. We proposed in this projection a expansion of the fiber to the home system for telecom. And then we also have the ESS and delivery maintenance and capital projects. It's important to know that the interest on the new bonds is capitalized until 2020, so we don't actually start paying interest until 2020. And then we do have routine capital, an average of about $6 million, a little bit more than $6 million a year. Now on telecom, a couple of notes. I've got a little bit more detail on what we propose with telecom later in the presentation. We'll be back in early 2017 with more details on that. So again, this is just a forecast of how telecom could proceed.
Lisa, do you want us to wait to the end to ask questions, or how do you want us to do that?
If you've got questions now, go ahead.
Well, I'm just curious of the 19% rate increase. How much of that's attributed to that 19.6 million telecom borrow?
A pretty good amount of it, but there are increased O&M expenses as well.
So you have a breakdown of what the rate increase would be without that project?
No, I didn't run that exact number.
We certainly can run that.
Yeah.
I think we need to distinguish that.
Just for my own edification, so basically, the previous slide you had, so about 5 cents per kilowatt hour. So the average person uses 1,000 a month. That's $50 a month. So the average person is paying $50 a month. Is that for just for that?
No, I mean the rate, the residential rate, if we do this, goes from 100 and seven numbers or something. Let me make sure I get it right. It's about $110 a month now, and it goes to about 125 or so in 2020.
Just for what?
That's all of it.
All of it. But I'm talking about just for the ECA and ECCA. You've got 4.92 cents is what you had those first two numbers together there. Is that right? About a nickel? And the average person uses 1,000 kilowatts an hour? a month?
800 or so.
Close to.
But if they used 1,000, it'd be $50 a month. Is that
Right,
just
roughly,
about,
yeah.
is that about right?
Correct.
And then you're going to raise that 2017 at 1 cent,
Correct.
which is a 20% increase. Is that about right?
In
20% increase of the ECA.
Of the ECA.
not
Yeah.
Overall.
No,
increase.
just that. But I mean, that's pretty stiff. I wonder if the environmentalists understand that. I mean, that's where it's going, right? Is that?
Well, no, the ECA increase is due to the revenue
That's-
shortfall from wholesale market. And that's what we've been talking about. You know, that multicolored line that we chart that you get that shows how much the shortfall is causing us to increase the ECA rate. We think it'll be less than, be about a half a cent, not a full cent.
Okay.
So that has nothing to do with environmental.
Okay, that's not the, so that's just the ECA,
The
okay.
ECCA is environmental though.
Okay.
My
You're right on
question
that.
is, so nothing in O&M is environmental related?
No, all the environmental costs, we did the base rate
All environmental
adjustment.
should be in the CCA.
We did the base rate adjustment last year, and the city commission approved that. We moved all those costs to where they should be in the ECCA. So the base rate and the ECA do not include the environmental costs at this point in time.
So I'd like to see a breakdown of what that O&M is.
And why does that go up 3 to 5% O&M and G&A? When, I mean,
That's my
if
question.
the rate of inflation for the nation is 1%, why does that go up 3 to 5% every year, especially when we can't give our employees a raise?
Especially when ECCA and ECA are already picking up the environmental and wholesale.
Yeah.
That's why I was.
And
Well,
the
I mean,
cost of coal's gone down, so
Yeah, I mean, we project the 3%, that's what we use as a base assumption. You know, obviously, these are just projections, so as we get closer each fiscal year, when you approve the budget, it's based upon known increases that we'll see, but we want to, on average, it's been about 3%. You look at all of our
Historically,
services.
back the last 10 years.
Yeah. So that would include wage increases for employees, that would include all of our service provider increases, material cost increases, engineering costs, I mean, everything that goes up.
Yeah. Okay.
one clarification, the routine numbers that we do on the environmental control equipment, scrubber maintenance, that's not in the ECCA, that's more of the reagents, the limestones, ammonia and all that. So the actual O&M number does include the maintenance on the equipment.
Why would you include that in ECCA?
We just always put it in as it's a fixed cost. We have to maintain the equipment. So it's actually, there's some it's in the base rate. So our fixed cost of operation, which includes labor for both operations and maintenance, ongoing fixed costs, we have put those in the base.
We did move the limestone plant and all
Yeah,
that.
consumable.
Yeah, all that's.
All that.
But you could probably make a case.
You could,
I think if you're really trying to distinguish what the environmental components costed you, I think you would want all the environmental components in this ECCA.
We just had Kelly go back and do the
That's not really
study,
true
and he
cost.
looked at all those and moved everything that he thought should be in there.
yeah, but we still have, like, our labor, we have to allocate labor then between the operation of generating units and operation of the air pollution control equipment. Because right now we lump it all together as a fixed cost. We're paying those people to operate the equipment, and it's a fixed cost that we're gonna have for the year when we put it into the base.
So any capital project we're using outside labor is in the ECCA?
It's just capitalized.
Just your in-house?
Okay.
And one final note on this, obviously, when IRP comes out, that could change ESS or delivery capital. Okay. One key assumption in here is that Elmer Smith Station runs pretty well as is through the end of the projection period, so through the end of fiscal 2022. So when you see the note about the two outages, I said ESS runs. ESS Unit 1 shuts down at the end of 2019, as we discussed previously. ESS Unit 2 runs through the end of the projection period. And so when you see the two outages here, it's another thing that the IRP results could result in a change. So getting into some numbers, retail revenues, you see an increase in 2018. That increase basically stays there until 2020. The biggest part of that is the ECA. And as we discussed, that's from wholesale losses, additional ESS costs. But in 2021, we do see a decrease. We see a decrease in ECA that we're projecting. That's from the decreased wholesale shortfall as a result of Unit 1 shutting down, and lower O&M cost at that time. But a big decrease in 21 is what we talked about on the ECCA, the SO2 and NOx equipment being paid off, so the depreciation and interest on those two components goes down. And at the very top, telecom, it is a small portion of total electric system revenue, but you do see that it increases as the years go on. Looking at the ECA balance, the projected ECA balance at the end of all the fiscal years, 2017, again, is the budget. It's not a projection based on actual. So it's projected to be, or it's budgeted to be a little bit above 10 million. But again, when we come back to you here in a few weeks with a recommendation for the December 1 rate increase, we'll have an updated version of that. The ECA policy actually does require us to switch the balance from owed to customers versus owed from customers every 5 years. During fiscal 2020, the balance does go below zero. At the end of the fiscal year, it's projected to be slightly below zero, but we do meet that requirement. And this does include the increases we talked about at the beginning. The 1 cent into 2017, 1 cent in 2018 increase, and then a 1 cent decrease in 2021. A lot of numbers on this slide. These are our residential rates. To go back to the question you asked earlier, it's broken down, or these are our rates by class. It's broken down by component, base rates, ECA, and ECCA, the various components of it. But to concentrate on just the total, down at the bottom, if you look at the residential rates, currently about 13.7 cents per kilowatt hour total. It gets up to 15.7 in 2020 and in this projection. But as some of these costs start rolling off, it goes down to about 14.7 by the end of this projection.
What do you mean by water by kilowatt hour?
The electric system charges the water system for the power that the water system uses. So
Okay.
that's the rate that OMU's electric charges on water.
Okay. So we charge ourselves, basically.
That's right.
We do, yeah, there's separate utilities, so two
I've never
separate
seen
cents of
water expense listed, they're usually a gallon.
We actually have a rate. It's a separate rate that was authorized by the commission and the city commission for the water system.
Okay, thank you.
And it's all based on cost of service. So it's just to recover the costs associated with the infrastructure and variable costs to be able to supply that electricity to the water system.
Okay, thank you.
Looking a little bit more at just revenue, this is total electric system revenue. So this is retail, wholesale, telecom, every dollar of revenue. And the red line is revenue. The stacked bars are the various components of revenue requirements. And so you see our revenue, as expected, just follows our requirements. A little bit up some years, a little bit down other years. You do see a pretty significant drop-off in O&M, which is the blue bar down at the bottom, in 2020 as a result of the projected Unit 1 shutdown. You see a debt service increase in 2017. So the bonds were refinanced several years ago to smooth out the total debt service, but it did increase in 2017, and it's expected to stay at that higher level through the projection period. And at the top, the purple bar is a slight increase in the city dividend and payment in lieu of taxes. Taking that and looking at only retail revenue instead of total revenue, we built up a more detailed look at the requirements for retail revenue. So the big blue bar at the bottom is ESS purchase power. You see that in 2020 that goes down slightly. Total ESS costs go down in 2020, but retail's percentage share of ESS cost goes up because you have less wholesale sales to offset it, but there is a slight decrease. The red bar above that shows an increase. That is purchase power from external sources. So when you go from 2 generators down to 1, you have a higher risk of having to purchase power to supply your customers, and that's reflected there. And the other big change in 2020 is the wholesale shortfall. Again, when Unit 1 is shut down, we have less wholesale length, and therefore we have a little bit less shortfall in wholesale revenue. But the red line shows the same effect that we saw earlier. Revenue more or less follows the revenue requirements. Taking just a couple slides to look at debt service. By design, debt service is pretty much level every year. The existing debt service, which is most of what's shown here in the blue, that does include our projection of savings from the refinancing that's currently on the table. So that saves $2 to $3 million, hopefully closer to $3 over the remaining life of those bonds. The green sliver at the top is the proposed debt service that we talked about borrowing earlier. Taking a little bit longer view of that, you see the same numbers out through 2022, but then added 5 more years onto that. There is a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel as far as debt goes. In 2026, some of that rolls off, and in 2027, more of it rolls off. And so looking at the existing debt plus what we propose borrowing, by 2026, it's a whole lot less of a burden each year.
I'll just point out that, in 2027, when the debt matures, that's when the debt on the power plant goes away. Okay? And our objective in managing rates is to try to get to that point with the least impact to customers. Because when we get to that point, as you can see, our revenue requirements drop significantly, $25 million a year. So that's what we're trying to do, is get, every time we've redone our debt, refunding to try to get lower rates, we have not pushed out the maturities of the debt. We need to pay off that debt. And that's what our objective is, to get to that point where we can pay it all off. But between now and then, do it in a manner that has the least impact on customers.
Of course, our debt service could go up if we have to invest in something like Henderson or something like that. Is that true?
Well, we're structuring, there are some alternatives, yeah, but there are ways that we can structure such a transaction to where the debt would be back-end loaded rather than front-end loaded, and would match up with this debt as this debt comes off.
These numbers basically are based upon us not having spent or borrowing more money than we have.
All it has in there is the $19 million of an incremental debt between now and 2022.
Okay, thanks.
And that's the little green sliver that you
Yeah.
see.
We talked a little bit about retail revenue, taking a look at wholesale revenue. The red line is gross wholesale revenue. The blue line is gross margin, so that's wholesale gross revenue minus the variable cost of serving wholesale load. And then the green line is wholesale net income, and that's gross margin minus all the other expenses that are allocated to wholesale. So you see the blue line, gross margin, stays above 0 in all years. That's an indication that in all these years, wholesale is more than covering its variable cost and contributing to the fixed cost of the utility as a whole. But you see net income is below the line. So when we go back and we talk about ECA, the need for ECA increases, a large portion of that increase, the increases that you see in that are because of the shortfall. You do see a change in all 3 lines in 2020. Again, that's a result of the projected Unit 1 shutdown. So when you're in a losing market like this, having less length does have this effect. It improves net income. A little bit more on wholesale. This graph helps explain the previous one. So the red line is the average price of the projected power that we think we will sell in the wholesale market. The blue line at the bottom is the variable cost of production. So this is coal, limestone, other variable cost of the inputs at Elmer Smith Station. So again, the good news is the wholesale price is above that line in all years. The first part of the bad news is that the margin between those, the spread between those, is shrinking. So in 2015, the margin was more than $10 per megawatt hour. So every megawatt hour that went into the wholesale market, it was contributing about $10 to fixed costs. In 2022, that margin has gone to about half, a little bit less than half, $4.53. But looking at the total cost of production, that includes not just the variable cost, that also includes the fixed costs. So the debt, the fixed O&M, the operations labor, those things. So that is above, with the exception of fiscal 2015, that is above the wholesale price. But once again, we see that effect in 2020 and beyond of Unit 1 shutting down. So the total cost of production comes down relative to the wholesale price. So it does, again, help our wholesale margin. Looking at some of our financial metrics, so with everything that we show you with the expenses and capital as we projected, and the revenue with the rate changes that we've discussed, it actually leaves us in pretty good shape as far as reserves, and that's important. It leaves OMU flexible to handle whatever the future brings. It's well above our minimums and our targets. A lot of numbers on this slide, but a couple of things to note. The red number's up about 6 lines from the top. You see our increase that went into effect at the beginning of this fiscal year, and you see the two 9.5% increases that we project. The red numbers towards the bottom. The story here is that the debt service coverage ratio stays in good shape, as does our operating cash on hand ratio.
What do you need a 9.5% increase if you've already got 247 days of cash on hand in 2019? You're going to go to 362 in 2020. Why should you need 9.5%? Why couldn't you have less than that?
It's primarily to keep our debt service coverage where it needs to be. Yeah, you're right. Those two metrics kind of play off of each other, but you have to satisfy both. And without the rate increase, we fall below our bond covenants as far as debt service coverage.
Yeah, as long as we have bonds outstanding, we have to keep the debt service coverage ratio above 1.25.
And the final slide, I want to talk a little bit about telecom. Red line is, the blue line is its revenue. Red line is its expenses. Green is net income, so accrual basis net income. And then finally, the purple line is cash flow. So basically, cash basis results. Revenues in our projection are increasing faster than expenses. In 2020, revenues overtake expenses, so it becomes net income positive in 2020. And then in 2022, it becomes cash flow positive. So we're kind of constrained by looking at 5 years, but the projection is for this trend to continue beyond 2022. And so in 2022, telecom actually starts contributing to the bottom line of the electric system as a whole. But as I said earlier, we'll be back in early next year with a whole lot more details on the business plan for telecom. But this is what is included in the projection.
And all that's based on our experience from the last 2 years.
Correct. It assumes a market penetration rate at the same rate that we're achieving now.
That $19.5 million that was going to be required for capital, will the telecom be able to pay as they go with that?
Yes, these numbers include the
How much
payment
of it's
on that.
telecom though? It's not all 19.2 is telecom.
My question.
No.
How much is that?
19.6.
It's not. Yeah, telecom's project is actually 19.6, but there's a lot of there's $8 million in construction funds right now to be used towards that delivery Elmer Smith Station project.
Yeah, so not the potential debt issuance in 18 is not only to fund telecom. There are some other investments that we need to make on the transmission distribution side and at the power plant.
Did you anticipate telecom if they need to borrow that money to continue a business, that increased business will generate enough income to pay off that.
Yeah, that's
that
exact-
debt.
we think
They
it'll
want it to
be
be
cash flow.
subsidized by the rest of OMU.
In fact, it'll be it will be providing a subsidy to the rest of the electric system after 2022.
Right.
Other questions on electric, because this is our last electric slide, and with no other questions, we'll move over to water.
And on the telecom, is there, in this projection, is there technology upgrades included in the model that, you know, the telecom and equipment that they have down there? We just bought a whole new set of equipment to replace the other stuff that's 10 years old.
Right.
It's even moving faster, probably going to need to roll over 5 years.
Yeah, most of this is the
Infrastructure.
A lot of it's only the upgrades to the electric facility, they will attach that to our facilities.
But the boxes themselves that go into folks' homes and things like that, we'll recover the cost of that through the rate.
I'm not talking about that, I'm talking about the equipment sitting next door.
Yeah.
It's a part, I mean.
Yeah. And obviously, that will need to be upgraded periodically.
They'll be depreciating instead of just being replaced. They'll be depreciated. That's the plan.
Normally, that's how we would do it. So, I think bottom line here for the electric system is we've got several years of we've got headwinds for several years, given the low wholesale market price. The IRP is going to be very important in terms of what our recommendation is for the long-term future of Elmer Smith and the replacement generation for that. And that can have a material impact on the need to raise these rates, the 9.5% increases that we're showing currently. That's all premised upon operations as normal, operating Unit 2 at least through this 5-year forecast period. So when we get with you guys in early December for the summary of the IRP, we'll probably be revising some of the aspects of this. And the IRP is not looking just at 5 years. The IRP is looking at a 10-year impact and a 15-year impact on rates, not just 5 years. All right, let's move on to the water.
Okay. Looking at water over the same section, some key assumptions. Our recent history has seen basically a flat demand in water, both number of customers and average usage for each of those customers. So that's what's in our projection. We included a increase in wholesale revenue from the ongoing discussions with the districts about their contracts. Same O&M expenses, slight increase each year. The biggest assumption here that could change is the amount of capital that will be expended to expand the cabin plant. There's testing going on right now at the existing cabin plant to determine the exact makeup of the equipment that will be needed to expand it. So that number could change. So as Terry said, when and if that does, the numbers you see next will include whatever the best estimate is at that time. Going back, one key assumption, just as a reminder, it's assumed that the expanded cabin will be online in the early part of calendar year 2020. And at that same time, Plan A will be taken out of service. So I'm going to start with a series of charts that show what our results will look like with current rates, without any changes to the rates. So looking just at revenues, you see the blue bar is pretty much flat. Again, the retail rates don't change, and we're not projecting a lot of growth. In fact, we're projecting almost no growth in retail sales. So looking at revenue, the total revenue resulting from those sales is the red line. That's the existing revenue. Looking at the components of revenue requirements, O&M, the blue bar, the big one at the bottom, increase over time. Existing debt service stays about the same. A big increase, as expected, is the proposed debt service. So this is the debt service on that $45 million bond that we're proposing. A little bit more detail on O&M and G&A. For the most part, these are increasing at a relatively steady rate, but there are a couple of exceptions to that, and I'm going to pull those out and talk about them separately. The gold or possibly orange colored bar, general and administrative expenses, you see a decrease in that in 2017. We made an accounting change to pull our employee benefits out of G&A and put those in the O&M. And so you see a decrease in it and an increase in most of the other categories. Treatment, which is the green line, that's increasing at a little bit faster rate than the other expenses. Treatment, the biggest cost in treatment is chemical expenses, and so we're projecting a higher than average increase in that, and it does include the sodium hypochlorite conversion in cabin. Finally, pumping expense, the red line at the bottom, you see it's actually decreasing. The biggest component of pumping expense is purchase power, going back to your question from earlier, is purchase power from the electric system. Electric rates are projected to go down, and so what the electric system charges the water system is projected to go down towards the later end of this projection.
The transmission and distribution, is that because you have to build a new line between the old plant and the new plant, or is that part of that expense in there? Or?
No, that's just our ongoing main replacement. Yeah, ongoing operation of the distribution system for getting water to customers.
Expansion of the distribution system, modernization.
Well, we don't, we're not actively, we're not actively replacing wholesale sections of the water system, the buried pipes. We are addressing them as we find it. So like when the city does an intersection rebuild, we'll replace those sections of the water system, but we're not actively going in and disturbing pipes just to replace them. Because we don't see the leakage rate that would warrant such activities.
Okay, slightly different way of looking at O&M, just to point out that variable costs, the blue bar at the bottom, are relatively steady. Variable costs being chemicals and purchase power. It's the fixed costs where the increases are being seen. So again, with our current rates, days operating cash falls below both our goal and as well as our bond requirement. The green line is the goal, the yellow line is the requirement. Again, with current rates, looking at our debt service coverage ratio, it falls below both our goal and our required level. So, with that said, we are projecting rate increases to increase to improve our ratios. Now, with again, a $45 million bond is a big thing for water, and you can really impact significantly the rate changes needed by servicing that debt differently. So to get our head around that, we analyzed 14 different options, 14 different ways of servicing that debt, and we narrowed it down to 3 that we want to present today. When we come back and actually request approval for the financing, we'll have one of these options, or possibly some other one that we evaluate, picked out. But for today, we want to give you all a order of magnitude of the range increase of the rate increases that would be needed, and so we're using these 3 options to do that. So the 3 options are a 30-year repayment term without capitalizing any interest. So that means you start repaying the debt immediately. Option B, a 25-year repayment term, but with 2 years of capitalized interest. So so for the first 2 years of the loan, you would not repay anything. You would actually borrow the amount of interest that was accrued during those first 2 years, and then start repaying after 2 years instead of initially. And then option C is exactly what I just described, except you would borrow 3 years of interest and not start repaying for 3 years. So one slide that summarizes the proposed rate increases that would be necessary under any of those options. All three require a 20 to 23% rate increase in fiscal year 2018. So you see that in the first set of bars. And then all three also require coming back in 2020 or 2021 for a smaller but 2-year phased-in rate increase, either 5% or 8%, and again, either starting in 2020 or starting in 2021. Up at the top, as a summary, is the total increase needed in this 5-year period under each option. Option A or B needs about a 33% rate increase over that 5-year period. Option C needs a 36% rate increase. And the next few slides just simply show some of the same graphs I've already shown, but they show it with the proposed increase rate instead of the current rate. So in option A, where we do a 30-year repayment term with no capitalized interest, the black line shows that revenue exceeds our revenue requirements. The red line is current rates. It shows that it does not. Same thing, option B. A little bit different revenue collection cycle, slightly different debt service, but it shows that it exceeds the requirements. And same thing, option C. Slightly different timing of repaying debt service, but it does exceed the requirements over the time period. Taking a look at our key financial ratios that I showed earlier, we're not satisfied by our current rates. It shows that all three options do satisfy, in this case, the days operating cash on hand. The red bar is current rates, once again, well short of the required minimum. Black bar is option A, the gray bar is option B, and the slightly less gray bar is option C. And so all three of those do meet our days operating cash requirement, as well as our debt service coverage ratio. And that's our last slide on water. So I'd be happy to try to answer any questions.
Questions?
So when are you going to make your decision on your recommendation on the financing of these bonds?
We're looking at the market every day.
Every day?
But at this point, I think we believe that the market will be more favorable directly after the election.
What's the longest we can wait?
June
If we,
2017.
the bond ordinance that was approved by the city commission allows us to wait till June. But we don't believe that rates will stay low for that long. So we want to get it done as quickly as possible. But at the same time, we don't want to sell into the high of the market.
It'd just be like a window between the election and potential December.
You know that, let me know.
Yeah, all the holidays and everything.
I'm thinking November.
Yeah. So, I just want to make a couple comments about the forecasts here. The forecasts are something that are necessary for operating a business. We have to know what the challenges are ahead of us in order to try to develop plans and strategies to try to improve. And that's why we do 5-year forecasts. That's why we're doing an IRP to look at 10 and 15-year forecasts on electric costs. That's our job, and we take it very seriously. And this, I think what this shows is on the electric system and on the water system, we have challenges. There's no question. And there's a lot of rate pressure as we invest significant capital on the water side, necessary investments to maintain the reliability of our system. On the electric side, the wholesale market continues to weight down our financial performance. And it has a huge impact as we go forward on rates, because anything we're not recovering from the wholesale market, we have nowhere else to go but to our customers to recover it. So that is combined with the environmental expense challenges that we have, the number that we've given to you several times, $37 million investment that we need to make in Elmer Smith in order to comply with the clean power, the CCR, the coal combustion residuals, and the effluent limitation guideline. That's not included in this. It is not included in these. So we have not included that expenditure in these numbers. Those are another challenge that we have. And at this point, and when we get into the RFP discussions in the next month, you'll see that we don't think it's a good decision to continue to invest tens of millions of dollars into this coal-fired generation, because there are much cheaper options out there. So again, the purpose of the plan is to give us something to improve against. And we certainly have those challenges here. And we're doing everything we can to try to find the lowest cost solution for customers.
So where with the 20-something% increase in water, and then whatever it's going to be, electric, at least with this projection close to 20, where does that place us statewide as far as rates with everybody else?
Well, I think it would keep us relatively the same as we are currently positioned, because everyone else faces the same issues, the same environmental.
Well, power generation, or water now.
On water, right now we have the lowest rates in the state.
I know, I'm just curious where it will be.
Yeah, we'll be in the lowest quartile of publicly owned municipal water treatment systems in Kentucky, even with that large increase. So very competitive water rates. We've just had the benefit of having extremely low water rates, and we have to make a reinvestment into the system in order to ensure reliability. Just as I've heard other people in the community say, things have gotten old and we have to replace them now.
We'll have that data when we do our cost of service study and our rate increases. We'll come back to the board in the spring for the next fall.
Yeah. So, these are just projections, and again, every time we make a rate increase, as you know, you have to approve that, and we'll have to provide the data to justify that increase.
Yeah, doesn't look like with the other ones, this thing that Brittany sent out to us all the other day, LG&E and KU are going to raise their rates. They're projecting 8.5% for electricity and 4.2 for gas. So it looks like other people are the same.
Is that
Well,
any indication what smart meters would cost us?
We do know that number. Do you remember what the number is?
Yeah,
1 or 2 million.
yeah, but the electric was,
Water was 7 and the electric was less.
Yeah, our approach on smart meters is we will install them when they either pay for themselves, so the savings that we achieve through lower cost of meter reading, data processing, bill preparation, etc., justifies it, or when our customers demand it. And we're getting ready to start a pilot we have preliminary economics. We kind of know where the break-even point is. We think we're very close. We're going to do the pilot that you've approved, and that'll be rolling out, I guess, in January. Yeah. Installing how many meters?
they said 25 electric and 25 water.
Yeah. And we'll use that, the performance of those to validate our assumptions. And then we'll be back to you with a recommendation on how we should proceed. But I'm not in favor of borrowing money to go put smart meters in that aren't going to save customers money in the long term. That's certainly not what our plan is. You got to remember that investor-owned utilities like LG and KU, their incentive is to invest capital dollars because the Public Service Commission gives them a return to shareholders on that investment. We don't have the same business motivation. So that's why we do things different.
There's still some apprehension on the public about the smart meters too. They're not totally with all the cyber and hacking and
Yeah.
security.
Yeah,
and
I
all,
don't
there's
think,
still some
everything I
limits.
read about them, I think those are unwarranted concerns, but nevertheless, you know, there are some perceptions out there that there's some privacy issues associated with all that data.
And you want anything in this 5-year forecast for a smart grid?
No. No. And again, my view is if those investments make economic sense, we'll make them. If they don't make sense, we won't recommend them to.
At the Water District luncheon last week, you mentioned that after January or something, there'd be a presentation on possibly the use of solar power. Is that going to be included in the IRP next month? Some
It
of
is
those?
not included in the IRP because the screenings are showing that the solar option is a more expensive option than the other options that are available. And the solar, I mean, practically speaking, we could never generate all the energy we needed for the city of Owensboro with solar arrays. The cost would be astronomical. Just the land needs would be astronomical. But what we are doing, we have a team that is putting together detailed cost analysis and rate impacts associated with several approaches to integrating solar into our mix on a smaller scale. And we'll be presenting to those to you in the first quarter of next year.
That's great.
To me, that's a policy decision that the community needs to make.
Sure.
I believe it's going to cost more money to ratepayers to integrate solar. And if the community wants to do that, we can do it. It's just going to cost.
Who owns that small solar farm on I-64?
Those are being put in by the co-ops up there.
Hoosier Energy?
Hoosier Energy is, one of them's a Hoosier Energy project. The one that's further east, over towards Sellers or New Albany, is owned by Harrison County REMC. They're both Hoosier Energy distribution cooperatives.
Is Vectren putting one in too? Vectren over your
I
area?
don't know. I'm not familiar with that. There is one up I-69, the new part of I-69 that you can see, and that one's actually been put in by Indiana Municipal Power Agency for one of its members. In all cases, the decision behind making those investments has been a public policy decision, not an economic decision.
And what you read in the media, it seems like the communities that are doing, like a community solar project or whatever, they're all seem to be excited about it, but what you read in the media.
Yeah.
But
Well, I mean, from a economic development perspective, to the extent that you're marketing your community as a progressive, forward-looking community, there's some value to having a solar generator in your community. It's a perceptive value. It's not an economic value. But again, that's a public policy issue that will be provided to you, and then we'll look to your guidance as to whether you want us to take it to the city commission for consideration.
I think it's good to look at it.
At the same time, KYMEA is also doing an analysis of solar and wind and other types of renewable resources that we'll have access to early next year as well. So there's a lot of data out there. And one thing about solar, the cost of solar panels keeps coming down. And it's projected over the next 10 years to even drop further. So it's kind of one of those things, if you wait, the longer you wait, the cheaper it becomes.
Also, the longer you wait, if you lose that subsidy, the federal subsidy.
Potentially.
Potentially.
I mean, what Congress has done is they keep re-upping the subsidy. And as long as they will continue to provide that subsidy, then all of us as taxpayers continue to provide an incentive to developers to build those types of generators. So are there any other questions about the?
Nice job. Yeah.
And Jason and Lynn and her team have done a lot of good work on this. I'm just really pleased with the tools that we're developing to be able to do these scenario analysis, like on the rates here for the water. We can very quickly run another scenario and just see what the effect is on all rate classes very quickly. So we're building better tools.
Coming up with 14 options tomorrow.
Yeah, well, wait till you see the IRP. The IRP, how many options? It's thousands.
We're going to whittle it down. though.
Thousands.
I hope so.
Thousands of iterations.
This will give you the top ones.
But we completely run all the analysis through the computer models to make sure that we're not missing a combination of options that would result in a lower cost. I have nothing further, Mr. Chairman.
Motion we adjourn.
Very good. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.